Hello, welcome to Life Matters. I'm your host, Brendan O'Connell. Life Matters brought you the grand jury indictment of abortionist Kermit Gosnell back in February of 2011. His West Philadelphia abortion clinic was nicknamed Gosnell's House of Horrors. 2 years later, the death of one woman and 7 infanticide deaths inside his abortuary came to trial. Today's guest was at this lengthy murder trial. He reported almost daily as to what was happening inside the courtroom. With the trial concluded and the jurors finally rendering their verdict, Life Matter asks for his insights, impressions, and thoughts from beginning to end of the trial. Moreover, why did the shrinking viewing audience of mainstream media such as ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and MSNBC either not report on this trial at all or just make fleeting, cursory mention of it? Our guest is the co-founder of Rachel's Vineyard, the largest post-abortion ministry in the world. He is a licensed social worker and a pastoral associate of Priests for Life. He has conferred a master's degree from Bryn Mawr Graduate School of Social Work. He's co-authored several books on post-abortion counseling, and perhaps most importantly, he's happily married to the beautiful Teresa Burke and the proud father of 5 children. Well, welcome, Kevin Burke.
Thank you so much. So good to be with you and your audience.
Kevin, what's so sensational about the Kermit Gosnell murder trial?
I think what's sensational was perhaps for the first time, and it's true that coverage was initially, it was really a blackout on this, but near the end there was actually a lot more coverage surfacing even in the mainstream media. And it's shown a light on something that for many folks who are involved in the pro-life movement are already quite well aware of, and that is the practices that go on in many abortion businesses. Gosnell is not the only abortionist who's doing these type of late-term abortions. But this provided an opportunity to shine light on the practices in the context of a courtroom and legal proceedings where evidence had to be brought forward and reviewed. And so I think that was extremely important. And then, of course, the verdict itself, convicting him of murder through the idea of the type of abortions he did, was a first. So it was a very important process to go through legally, and also I think for the public, who was protected in many ways and shielded from what the reality of abortion truly is. At least it was the beginning of people to begin to understand how the Roe v. Wade decision actually produced a Gosnell by having abortion on demand with very few restrictions, and that the logical outcome of that, the natural outcome, is that it produces someone like a Gosnell who is delivering babies born alive and then doing the gruesome practices of snipping their spinal cords and the other horrific things that I listened to for the number of days I was there.
Kevin, can you tell us what charges were leveled against him and brought to trial against him? Some of the charges.
Well, there were charges that were related to the death of a woman through medical malpractice, which was a widespread problem in that center. But there was one particularly serious case where there was a direct result of medical mismanagement. But there were a number of cases of children who were born who clearly showed evidence of breathing, of their chest moving, of squirming. And so it was the job of the prosecuting attorneys to say that these children were taking their first breaths and were alive, and therefore it violated the law of the state of Pennsylvania, which on 2 counts. One is that the unborn children were over the age of 24 weeks gestation, so they took a lot of time and a lot of medical testimony to indicate that these babies were clearly, a number of them, many of them were over the age of 24 weeks, and that some of the more disturbing and heart-wrenching testimony involved the description of these children being born and of them squirming and moving and being born in toilets. And it was just, one of the blogs I wrote about, I came out of the courtroom one day after the testimony of Karlie Cross, and what came to mind is a term paper I did as a senior in high school on Dante's Inferno, of his journey from hell to paradise. And at the entrance of the gates of hell, Dante has the inscription, "Abandon hope, all ye who enter here." And it was really my sense of they should put that above the courtroom, because the depth of darkness that was being exposed in a very clinical and legal framework, but you couldn't escape the fact that this is a diabolical and dark actions that are happening to these unborn children. So those were the two areas of that were being focused on in response to the legal and the medical issues.
Well, mentioning Karlie Cross, I guess her testimony was rather incriminating. What did she testify? And also, I understand that she was pregnant while working in Gosnell's abortory. What impact does that have?
That's a very important point. She had an abortion prior to working there, or perhaps early in her time working there. So she has an abortion in her history, which is significant to someone getting involved. You would be surprised to know that one of the ways that some women deal with their post-abortion suffering, and of course Abby Johnson would be someone who has written about this in her autobiography, is they get involved then in the abortion work. They try to work through their own post-abortion issues and pain, and of course it only further traumatizes them. But it makes us susceptible to get involved in this kind of stuff. So she had an abortion, but she also later was pregnant, and Gosnell, very not so subtly encouraged her that, becoming pregnant and your belly growing in this business is probably not a good idea. It's not going to be good for the bottom line. And so he was, really pressuring her to have an abortion. So that's Karima testified. Some of the most horrific testimony I heard came from Karima. She was testified and cross-examined for almost a full day. She described a baby being born in a toilet, and what happens is these women were given drugs to soften their cervix so that they would not be able to hold the child any longer in the womb. And some of these babies were well advanced and advanced in weight. And so, these babies would be coming out in the waiting room. They'd be coming out in the procedure room before the doctor was even there. And at some situations, and one in particular, she described this poor little child being born in the toilet and was actually moving in the toilet. And so the assistant then took the child out of the toilet and with the scissors then punctured the neck and severed the spinal cord of the child. Now, keep in mind that not only is this a horrific thing for this poor unborn child, but also keep in mind that the people involved in these procedures, witnessing them, performing them, the mother was conscious during this. She sees her baby taken away, and God knows what desperation led this poor woman to be seeking a late-term abortion. I know from our work in post-abortion healing that sometimes there's such pressure, there's sometimes violence against them, tremendous poverty. Of course, it's never a reason to abort a child, but we know that there's tremendous pressure that women face. So this woman is seeing this, not only delivering this child in this traumatic way, she's then seeing the child killed. She described other babies being born whose chests were clearly moving up and down. She talked about a child being born who was clearly near or at full term, and that when Gosnell performed the procedure, the child was delivered, and then later the child's again, the neck was cut and everything. But prior to that, the child was moving in a body. He put the child in a large kind of a container, a Tupperware container, and the child, she saw the child move its limbs, knowing that it was still alive. And he made a comment, and this is probably the most, your listeners, they're hearing a lot of horrible things, but to me, the most horrible thing I heard in the testimony was after he delivered that child, he said something to the effect, and I believe this is a direct quote, that this one's old enough to walk to the store.
Wow. And
it's that level of dissociation from what you are doing and the reality of the horror, to being detached to that level. We know that human beings are capable of tremendous evil when they have that level of numbing to this kind of horrible procedures. And we know that this is common among many abortionists. When they first perform the procedures, and Father Frank wrote about this in a recent column, that they describe that it's very disturbing. They have nightmares. They have a sense there's like electricity's going through them. They know they're involved in something very powerful and very dark even. But yet the more they do it, the more they gain mastery over that trauma, and then they become detached. And that's a very dangerous place for a medical professional to be.
Mm-hmm. And let me ask you, in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, what is considered a late-term abortion? Isn't there a cutoff in weeks? And how many weeks is it?
It's 24 weeks.
And was Gosnell doing abortions after 24 weeks?
Oh, he absolutely was. And I would say that, the term that was used often, Brendan, was many.
Many, wow.
Many. So I think that this was only the tip of he was convicted of a number of counts of murder of children born alive. But there were many situations like this where we had children after 24 weeks. Although, this is something I blogged about. The district attorney, understandably, but he said Gosnell is a monster based on what he did. But the same district attorney was saying that, this case is not, in the closing arguments, he said, this case is not about safe and legal abortion. This is about someone who was killing babies who were born alive. And I was sitting there in the courtroom and thinking, this is insane. So it would be okay if the child's not breathing. It's 24 weeks or 22 weeks or 27 weeks or 18 weeks. And it's in its mother's womb. And we go in there and the child is dismembered limb by limb. And that's okay. It seems to me that it's even more painful for the child, particularly at later stages of development, to be dismembered in its mother's womb as opposed to being delivered and born alive. So the trial also revealed to me what we already know, but I think it revealed not only to those who were pro-life, but I talked to a number of journalists who entered that courtroom solidly pro-abortion and were really beginning to re-examine the whole issue. One of the gentlemen was from a major magazine, and he talked about the tortured logic that had to be used to differentiate what Gosnell was doing with some of the earlier procedures that he was doing, which were...
Mm-hmm. Can I ask you, did Gosnell keep medical records of his patients, or did he throw them out when this trial began? What happened there? Was there any way to see how many were done? And
yeah, I think that they had access to a lot of the records, and there were many aborted children who were kept on either in chemicals or in refrigeration. So they were able to look at the gestational age and examine his practice in great detail.
So you're saying that he did not dispose of all of the children? He kept them in his facility in a refrigerator?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes.
That's something.
Yeah, and he also kept. He would sever the feet and collect the feet, and again, I point back because we want to look at this guy and we want to say monster, evil monster, the devil. And of course, evil is involved. There's no doubt about that. But this is the natural corruption that takes place when you have to master, the natural, what should be repugnance to doing something like dismembering a child in the womb. To do abortions itself requires a doctor to have to numb himself to the natural human reaction and actually to really betray the core elements of his profession. So once you start down that road, what's to hold you back?
Right. All right, that's something. Now, what about the city or the state of Pennsylvania, Commonwealth of Pennsylvania? What about government agency? Aren't they supposed to regulate these abortion clinics? Or why was there a lack of that going on?
Yeah, there was a tremendous lack of that, and I think that so many of the government agencies, so many individuals supposed to be involved in making sure these facilities are at least obeying the basic health laws and other requirements that you would have in any kind. You would have in a veterinary facility. The reason that you get away with such excesses and such horrible conditions is that they don't want anything negative to reflect on the issue of abortion. If they're afraid that we draw attention to this, or if we shine any kind of negative light on this, then we are aiding and abetting the anti-abortion forces. So unfortunately, I think that's something that really colors the reporting on this, the willingness to aggressively investigate centers like this. And this is something the abortion industry for years has been under the radar, because politicians and the regulatory agencies, the city governments, the county agencies, they don't want to shine any light on this. They don't want to bring attention to it. They're complicit. They're complicit in these issues as well.
I see. And as far as the abortion industry getting away with this, the medical profession has protocols that don't allow what a Kermit Gosnell or some of these other abortionists do. Do you think that the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania now, I guess they have a new governor who has changed some of the regulation, is that correct in your state? Are they investigating or
I think one of the results of this trial is that it is shining a light and drawing attention, and I think that it's going to definitely place more pressure on the government and on regulatory agencies to investigate and to look at these situations like this. So I think that's one of the positive outcomes. But again, it confronts us head on with the fact that we're talking about procedures where the child is born alive.
Right.
And sadly, this is going to then lead to them taking more aggressive procedures in the womb to end the life of the child in ways that are equally and to me more so horrific.
Now, let me turn and ask you, what about these post-abortive mothers who've been involved in late-term abortions, or even those in the courtroom who watch this? Are they re-traumatized by this, or do they feel that justice has been done by convicting Kermit Gosnell? What are your thoughts on that?
This is a whole separate issue. It's a monster issue in our society, especially for the poor. We know that in New York City, 6 out of 10 pregnancies among African Americans end in abortion. Gosnell Center was in West Philadelphia, in a poor neighborhood, minority neighborhood. The very people that can least afford to experience trauma such as this, who have the least amount of resources, who very likely have other trauma in their history, such as sexual abuse, physical abuse, perhaps have served in the military if it's a man. These are the folks that are most vulnerable to being traumatized by abortion, particularly later-term procedures. And what are the results of trauma such as this, of witnessing? And the interesting thing is the American Psychological Association talks about, in their statistical manual, they use to diagnose people with mental disorders. They talk about the definition of trauma is being exposed to a death event and being powerless to stop it. There could be nothing more traumatizing than what these women experience. So we know they're going to be having flashbacks, nightmares. They're going to use drugs and alcohol to suppress the pain. They're going to act out perhaps in their relationships. They're going to have relationship dysfunction. So the ripple effects of Gosnell not only go to the child that is killed, it's to the women that have been injured by this, to their existing children, the families that are going to be dysfunctional because of the parent has been destabilized by the trauma. It just goes on and on. The workers that worked in that clinic themselves, of course, they have responsibility for their behavior legally and morally, but they also have been traumatized by trusting this medical professional, falling under his spell, and doing these gruesome and horrible procedures. We know that they're abusing alcohol, they're abusing drugs, and they're having the after effects of trauma.
Mm-hmm. Now, how did the abortion industry try to spin this trial to minimize its obvious traumatic impact on all involved?
Well, they're doing a very effective spin, although I think there's some real good response to it. But one of the areas I've seen them spinning this issue is that, well, the reason that there's a Gosnell is because there's a not safe and legal abortion. There's not enough safe and legal abortion in poor communities. So we need more abortion. And if we have more abortion and more abortionists and better trained abortionists, then you're going to see less Gosnells.
Wow.
Now, again, that's a very seductive argument. I think one of the responses to that is that, well, let's start first with responding to the need for regulation of the industry. There are many more Gosnells. The abortion industry has never been properly regulated for reasons that we talked about previously. So I think one of the first things we have to do is stay strong and push head on with going after these abortionists that are violating the law, that have unhealthy clinics, that are hurting and maiming and killing women and unborn children and traumatizing them. So we have to go aggressively after that. But, then we have to back up and say, you know what, these earlier procedures, these D&Cs, the suction abortions, these abortions are also horrific for the unborn child, and they're also traumatizing women, and especially poor women who are least able to handle the after effects of abortion. And the symptoms of that are feeding the dysfunction in these poor minority communities who are already traumatized by violence and sexual abuse and other issues. Abortion can never be the answer, especially not for our poorest communities. It's just making the problems worse, and we see that. Look at the communities. Are the solutions that we've had for them, what are they doing? It's decimating them.
Now, why do you feel the mainstream media, such as NBC, CBS, ABC, CNN, and MSNBC, have a media blackout, almost a media blackout on this Gosnell trial, which took, 8 weeks or something?
Yes. Well, there's a couple reasons for that, but one of the first areas that I would focus on comes out of my own work in post-abortion healing, and that is that if you have abortion in your history, if you're a man who helped facilitate an abortion or abortions for a woman in your youth, if you're a woman who has had an abortion or abortions in your life and part of your professional advancement has been to have an abortion in order to continue in school or continue in your career, then there's two things going on with those people. One is that they're ideologically going to support and embrace and defend abortion rights at all costs. But also, there's a zeal in that's fueled by the fact that they have not dealt with the emotions and feelings and pain and spiritual suffering that is repressed and often unconscious inside of them. And so that fuels them being very zealously pro-abortion, and it also fuels them to not want to give any voice to anything that brings up something that's going to cause them pain, which is pro-life. Unborn pictures of unborn children, testimony of women like in the Silent No More Awareness campaign who talk about what abortion was really like for them. They're going to try to squelch that because there's so many people, over 50 million abortions. So many people in our country have been wounded by abortion and have not reconciled that loss, and that helps feed that. And of course, there's the general liberal bias in the media and protection of the abortion industry. We kind of talked a little bit earlier of why that is, but I think that issue of the incidence of abortions in people's past is a huge one. Mm-hmm.
Well, Kevin Burke, thank you so much for coming on the show. Just one final question: how can folks get in touch with you or your blog should they want to find out more?
If you go to priestforlife.org. And you'll see at the top there's a listing of blogs. Just hit that blog link, and down under Dr. Elvita King, I'm honored to be right under Dr. Elvita King is my blog, and you'll see lots of in-depth coverage of the Gosnell trial, a lot of these themes and trauma. Today I just posted on Jimmy Connors and Chris Everett's abortion. And I think that folks will find that if you find these issues interesting, that would be a great place to go. Okay, well, thank you so much, and we hope you found today's show on what actually occurred at the Gosnell murder trial to be unique, informative, content-rich, truthful, and thought-provoking. Thanks for watching. I'm Brendan O'Connell, your friend for life.